Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Every moment is sacred, where we interweave meditation and healing into everyday life. I am your host, Rain Elizabeth Stickney. Now, let us begin. I first met Seamus Berkeley in Berkeley, California. Isn't that funny? We lived together in a co-housing situation, and the house was called Rigid. And there were a number of people we lived with in an old Victorian split level, beautiful home with multi-generations. And Seamus and I became friends, and I'm so grateful for our friendship. In fact, he is the friend who originally became my gratitude buddy right when I needed one most. It was many, many, many years later, and neither of us were living in Berkeley anymore. I was in Mill Valley, California, and I believe he was back in Taos, where he has a beautiful art studio. And he and I were talking on the phone, and it was the beginning of the pandemic. It was actually August, so it was the point in the pandemic where, looking back, it was the beginning. But in August of 2020, it just wasn't even really clear what was going on. Was it the end? Was this going to end? And there were a number of hardships that I was facing, along with a lot of other people. And so I was telling Seamus about what I was struggling with. And he said, "Boy, you sound really stressed." And I was very stressed. And he said, "I've got an idea. How about we share some gratitude?" And we began a shared gratitude practice that we keep up with today. And the phenomenal results of not only being grateful, which is something I feel very into, I feel very good at personal gratitude. But with Seamus, it was the first time I was ever openly sharing my gratitude with someone regularly who was openly sharing their gratitude with me. And that sharing of grateful hearts is completely transformative. It was transformative for me. And since then, I felt inspired to create an offering for all of you listeners, friends and family, anyone who cares to join. It's an offering of a daily gratitude practice that we engage with through email, and it's called Redwoods and Snow. Seamus was the inspiration for that. So if you are one of the grateful hearts on the daily gratitude list, thank you for being there. I am grateful for you. And you are about to hear from the man himself who inspired this sharing of gratitude in me, which I feel very humored by because I know many people who have had gratitude partners in the past. And I always thought it was a good idea, but it took Seamus's offering for me to really engage and go deep with a friend in a transformative way. If you would like to join me and others in a daily gratitude practice, simply go to patreon.com/Rain Elizabeth, and you can sign up there. It's a monthly subscription. You can cancel at any time. People tend to stay on because it is so filled with joy and inspiration to simply share what we're grateful for, along with some special quotes and poems and photographs of daily life. So Redwoods and Snow is available to you thanks to the inspiration I received from Seamus. But our conversation, although it touches on gratitude, is actually about entering the contemplative realm through the visual field. Seamus is an artist. He's a visual artist. He primarily works with oils and paints these beautiful landscapes and portraits and memorable moments of life. His work is exquisite, and it's collected by people nationally and internationally. He has won awards, he has held seats of honor, and he is just a delightful human being with deep, deep insights into life and the world, meditation, and being human. And Seamus has a special gift for seeing things as they are, allowing constructs to drop away, allowing agendas to be let go of so that life can be perceived. And each of us who would like to can receive life as a gift. We can receive the visual world as a gift. And he does honor this is about sight. So there are many people in the world who have different experiences of vision. Whatever experience of vision you might have, this conversation is so much fun. And I love Seamus so much. I think you'll resonate with the connection that we have with each other. It's transmitted through our words and the topics that we share. Seamus can be found at his website, SeamusBerkeley.com. S as in Sam, EAMUS as in Sam again, Seamus Berkeley, BERKELEY.com, SeamusBerkeley.com. He was born in Dublin. He's currently living in Taos. I met him in the San Francisco Bay Area. He has traveled the world. He often does commissioned fine art paintings. I highly recommend him for anything that you are interested in terms of acquiring beautiful artwork for your home or office or sacred space. His style is representational, impressionistic, and gives a person an instant feeling of remembrance, beauty, and entering the doorway into the unknown with grace and pleasure and ease. I could go on and on and on about Seamus, as you can tell, but let's get to the conversation. Hey, Seamus. I'm so happy that you're here. It's so fun to talk with you in this way.
This is a new adventure, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to see your nature surroundings around you. That's a nice setting you got there.
Thank you. Yes, we're in between snows, and my background is the bottom of our driveway when the trees are laden with snow, and they will probably be laden with snow again in a couple of days after we get our next storm. So I have had the great pleasure and honor of knowing you for a long time. I met you in Berkeley, California at a co-housing type situation that we called Brigid.
I remember.
Yeah. And one of my favorite memories of you, not only was it delightful the way that you made coffee in the morning with the little, I don't know what you call it. I call it a percolator, but I don't think that's the right word. But it's like the cutest little coffee contraption on top of the stove. What is that called?
It's like it's a stovetop espresso machine. I just made some.
Oh, perfect.
It's probably a newer version of that thing because I probably used it up or something like that. But yep, that's been my habit for a while.
But the other thing that was so delightful was that there was a day in the kitchen when I was like washing the counters or doing dishes or putting dishes away or something like that. I may have even just been sitting and drinking tea. I don't remember the details, but what I do remember was you entered the kitchen and you turned out the lights. And then you turned to me and you said, natural light is better. And so often now, all these years later, I mean, I think that was 2005 or something like that.
It would have been 2005. Yeah.
Yeah, I still do that. I remember when I see extraneous lights on, not just for electricity and that sort of thing, but just for the pleasure of natural lighting, I turn off the light switches.
It's really, it's, at least I enjoy it. And actually, what you're looking at, my setting here is the windows of my studio are all facing north. It's all natural light. And so when I'm painting, it's, it shows up. You can see the way the light falls directly, and there's no artificial. And here too, in Taos, what's amazing, one of the amazing things about here is because it's so high up and there's not a huge amount of artificial lights in the area. Most of the month, when the moon isn't full, you walk outside and actually see shadows.
Wow, I haven't ever thought of such a thing.
Moon Shadow. I think that was a song, right? By
It
whatever,
is a
but
song.
it is really amazing because I think it takes the eyes about 15 minutes to adjust, but there's going to be no lights at all. And this is almost a thing I think we've lost in the world, at least in modern urban areas, of perceiving nighttime with our without any artificial lights. And
Mhm.
our eyes can actually adjust, but it does take 15 minutes. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I'm actually seeing shadows. I can walk around and I can function pretty well by the light of the moon.
So wonderful.
Mm.
So you are a visual artist, you're a painter, and also a meditator, practically your whole life, as I understand it. So take us in a little bit into your world, where you come from, how you got interested in painting and art and meditation. What's the connection between the two? What's
Hmm.
true for you?
Hmm. So just the personal history of this is, I mean, I remember drawing as a child. Somehow that was there, the ability to draw. Going forward from there, there was also another piece of I suppose I'd call it my attraction to meditation or spirituality. I don't even like that word, but I might call it the pondering of life, of our existence, right? It's like, oh, here we are, and what's going on? So not so much about like I've got to be a painter and this is my career and all that kind of stuff and be so focused on that, but it's like, oh, well, this is interesting. Here we are, and let's take a look at this. So between the drawing and let's say that focus of how to look in the world, there's another piece of this, which is the introduction of meditation, which I think I started around the age of 17. It's been pretty much a daily practice since.
Mhm.
But how that connects to the drawing is, or the artwork, or the ability to artwork. It's for me. It is whatever we've been given. Is that a lens that we can use to also explore contemplative or investigate the world with what we've been given? So art is one way. It could be music. It could be dance. It could be writing. It could be whatever that are we have a tendency toward. It's just putting the focus on that ability, that innate either capacity or capability, and remembering to use that as the means to open up our contemplative experience.
Mhm. So many different tools and ways to enter into that state or that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it doesn't have to necessarily, for me anyway, it doesn't have to be necessarily a formal practice. It doesn't have to be, well, I got to sit in my chair and I got to set my timer and I got to, whatever. I do that, but it's maybe more bringing it into a daily experience or a daily activity that I'm engaged in anyway.
Mhm. Yeah, so this is the crux of meditation in everyday life, of how one might go about meditating or entering that meditative experience just by way of what a person is naturally drawn to.
Indeed so. I remember a quote that kind of, I think, summarizes it is Thomas Keating, who started contemplative outreach. Phrase it this way: the fruits of contemplation are not in the meditation itself, but in everyday life.
I love it. Good one.
It's really true. It's like, okay, I'm sitting there. It's like, my mind is running and racing around, but it's the practice of, creating a spaciousness around the automatic things that are running through my mind or through my body to allow spaciousness around it. It's like, okay, let it pass, let it pass, let it pass. And then bringing that into the world. So again, here I am in daily life and I'm walking down the street. And because I have a tendency to focus on visual, right, the visual representation, it's like, I'm walking, trees, birds, clouds, sky, and let those be the contemplative practice, focusing on that. I can let my agenda go, right? Let the agenda go, let that be quiet. And now the contemplation is in the visual scene.
Now, I love that you said, let the agenda go. And part of my love for this has to do with so many people who come to me who say that as they're meditating, their to-do list is going, or there's an idea that meditating happens in a certain way, which for me refer to agenda type of a mindset. And for you, Seamus, how do you let go of the agenda? What does that mean for you?
And this is interesting because I don't necessarily quote Thomas Keating often, but he's really had a lot of good things to say about contemplation. And, most of what I study these days is Buddhism, but he came from this Christian tradition. He would say, before you start your meditation or your contemplation, set the intention. So if I'm setting attention in the intention of like, okay, I'm intending to, of another phrase that I like is to rest in awareness, then I drift off, mind goes somewhere else that picks up the agenda. It's like, and then suddenly it's like, I'm caught up in the mind. The mind is going. I'm caught up by that. So let me breathe. Let me come back to the body. The breath, awareness. I missed awareness. It comes and goes. That's my experience, and I think that's what a lot of people experience. Yeah, I think I've always had this thing, or maybe I let go of that. Of I gotta do this right.
Always good to let go of that one.
I gotta stop those thoughts, or like whatever, right? But now it's more of this is the way things are. There's a flow, and it's bringing back to the awareness, bringing back to resting the awareness. And part of it is setting the intention. Sometimes, let's say, for example, before I start a meditation, not sometimes, almost always, I will read some passage of a book, something that is part of setting that intention.
What would be an example of an intention you set before you go on a contemplative walk or before you have a meditative sit? What would be an intention that's true to you?
There are two main ones. If I'm on a walk, the intention is to notice the surroundings, even to notice what have I not seen? Same street, same pathway, everything the same. But what have I not seen today? That's one. And then there's another piece of that, which is also very fascinating, of how is the light today? Because the light, whether it's overcast, sunny, whatever, partially cloudy, it's almost always different. Even at the same time of the day, just the way it falls on things. How is it looking, on the objects that I'm looking at? So becoming aware of that, that's the intention. If it's more of a formal sitting practice, it's more about to come back to the body and breathing. Bodily sensation, breathing, that's my return to the intention of let me come back to the body and rest in awareness and let the agenda go.
It sounds like Thomas Keating has been influential to you. And what other teachers or anything in life, what other experiences, teachers have been influential in your practice, in your vision of reality?
The first main one actually was Gurdjieff. So I was introduced to Gurdjieff when I was actually in high school. And that became about a 10-year study with a Gurdjieff group. And then after that, it was Thomas Keating. And then after that, in fact, one of the reasons I went out to the Bay Area was because of Buddhism. So I wanted to study now Buddhism. And the first teacher that I followed quite a bit was James Baraz,
Mm-hmm.
who had the Thursday group in Berkeley. And through that group, I ended up being introduced to the one teacher that I follow most right now in the Buddhist world is Anam Thupten. So that phrase, rest in awareness, is actually a quotation of his, to rest in awareness.
Such a good one. Such a good phrase. Rest in awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And how has all of this practice through the years influenced your artwork and your painting and your
Ah,
expression in the world?
mm. I think there are two parts to that. One is it's that the action, the activity of making a painting is a contemplative practice. So that's a big piece of it. So it's like in the doing of that painting, it's bringing back to mind. It's almost like an ongoing meditation during the whole painting process, like bringing back to mind. It's like, well, what am I doing this for? But it's also to let go of the agenda while I'm in the painting process. So I'm looking at something, and instead of thinking, oh, I've necessarily got to get it right, or I'm looking at a flower, it's letting those thoughts go and getting as close as possible to just witnessing or experiencing the visual perception of that object. So, flower word goes away and it's without words. It's more of the visual of color, shape, edges, and so on. So that's part of it. So that's the first piece. Then the other part of that then is the intention of the painting itself. And once it's completed, in a way, and this is a question, does that painting somehow become imbued with some of that intention, which may sound a little wooey, but that's the there, and to bring it into the world with that intention in mind. So here's a painting. I might be talking about my artwork, and also letting people know that, yes, this is actually a reminder of contemplation, or a reminder to look at our world, right? To experience, for example, let's say something beautiful, to let go of the agenda, right? So it could be considered like, say, an icon for me, like an icon as a reminder. I think in the past, a lot more painting was much more directly speaking of remember to enter into the spiritual realm, right? Now, a more contemporary thing, it's okay, could beauty be that doorway for the viewer into an experience of spaciousness?
Yes, I say yes. And how do you do that? How do you enter that doorway of beauty into spaciousness?
Ah, what I'm doing is to answer that question. I'm looking at my window because my window has a fairly nice view of nature. There are trees, and there are clouds, and there's some blue sky today, and there's a little bit of flakes of snow coming down, and there's some actually a mountain with snow on it. There's birds. I think at least part of it is an appreciation, which for me is all, I don't. It's almost generated somewhat automatically by just looking. And I think this is not just me. I think a lot of people is, it's people, go awe at the sunset, right? Oh, look at the sun, right? People stop and, they get out of their cars and they have to take pictures. It's like, this is so like powerfully moving, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the only difference I might say is I'm not waiting for the precise sunset. I'm not waiting for the exact moment to take the exact picture. It's like, could I have those moments on a regular basis? Entering into is like, oh, look at that tree, right?
Yes.
Right? It's like just to stop and look at the shapes of a tree and how this is emerging from the ground, right? So to bring those things to mind, that may be enough to talk about, but that's
Mm-hmm. So you're gazing upon the natural world, and perhaps there's a tree, and there's this natural awe and wonder. Look at this tree. Look how it's connected to the earth. Look how it grows. And there we are, right there in the doorway of beauty, walking through into spaciousness.
indeed, indeed. The blue sky, a phrase, and I think this is attributed to Picasso. I don't know if it's true or not. What is blue? Just a little phrase like that. It's like, look at the sky. What is blue? And then there's another piece of the appreciation is, wow, we have this form. There's this form, our human form, that has this capacity, at least, if we do have visual ability, right, to experience this. It's like, oh, this is like crazy, right?
Indeed.
Like, what is blue?
What is blue, Seamus?
This is a good question, and I don't know if there's an answer to it, and that's okay. It's to almost to rest in the not answer. Like, what is blue? And then just let the blue enter into my awareness without trying to box it up into, I have it all figured out. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Because as soon as we have it all figured out, our perception changes.
Yes, I've created a mental cognition about it, which is fine, but
Sure.
that's a little bit of a barrier to witnessing, in this case, nature in and of itself.
Yes. I like that you're bringing in appreciation. And you and I had a phone conversation recently where we were talking about appreciation as related to gratitude. So right now we're on the end of appreciation that's looking at what is blue. In order to have that question, there is a natural appreciation for what is. And if we go to the other side of the spectrum of appreciation touching on gratitude, what do you notice today about that? What is appreciation related to gratitude?
Actually, from our conversation the other day, and we talked about this, like, is what's gratitude versus appreciation, and let's say nuances around the language. And this is what crossed my mind after that conversation was, what about talking about how we frame things, right? Like how, we do frame things constantly. But what about if I were to frame, well, let me back up for a second, because what I want to say is what struck me about the question of what is gratitude? And the answer that came to my mind was, I feel most grateful when I've been given something. So my experience, like, oh, wow, you gave me this. I am so grateful that you gave me this. So with that in mind, now walking outside and looking at the trees or the sky, I've been given.
Ooh.
This is given. Everything is given. How about the air? Breathing the air, it's given. It's given. This is all given. This whole emerging of the cosmos, of creation, it's all this giving, right? And if I frame it in that way, do I experience gratitude even more on a very personal level of like, wow. And it's a gift. I didn't pay for it. I didn't have to, I didn't, right?
I like this connection between gratitude and given.
What if everything is a gift?
Yes. Yes. What if? How might our perception change then? How might our appreciation change? How might our questions change if we're receiving this gift?
Yes.
I appreciate that you used the word frame and framing earlier. And I'm reminded of your paintings. And I'm reminded of not just this conversation, but some conversations that we've had in general about what we perceive and the constructs with which we interpret what we perceive, and how to create a painting from shapes and colors rather than from ideas and concepts. And I'm wondering if you can take us a little bit into your journey of painting, a little bit into your skill of seeing things as they are. If there's a short practice you could guide us through.
I'm going to get with that in a second. Just a funny thing happened. No one ever knocks at my door, and somebody just knocked at my door.
Oh my gosh.
Someone's knocking my door. Nobody ever knocked my door. And generally, if somebody just knocked my door, I never answered anyway. So just say,
Oh no. An aside about that, Seamus, is that I've had another podcast conversation for this show, for
yeah,
Every Moment is Sacred, where
yeah.
somebody's doorbell started ringing. So this happens. We're being called upon.
Which is funny because actually that is part of my practice. Like turn everything off, right? That's almost like number one before I start to paint. Turn off. I don't know, but I put the thing in a block all calls, block interruptions. I'm not going to answer anything because I don't want to be interrupted in this process of in the contemplative practice. It's almost like it is. It's a meditation practice. So to be more specific about, let's say when I'm doing a still life in particular, because the painting is ending up on a form, right? It's got dimension to it. It's only so big. It doesn't matter whether it's 8 by 10 inches or maybe 3 feet by 4 feet or 8 feet by 6 feet or whatever it is. It has its edges. It has a limitation on what's going to be presented. So I might start with a concept in my mind. It's like, oh, well, I'm going to paint like this one. I'm going to paint a flower, right? So I'm going to paint a calla lily, right? So I've got the calla lily. And I'm looking at the size of that canvas and thinking, okay, what do I want to fit onto that canvas in the space that I've allocated to paint? And this is where now it starts to shift, because once I've got the concept, then I actually really use this tool. And if this gets to a visual, which is basically, it's a framing tool. It's pretty nice, or I can use my fingers, whatever. But I'm narrowing my focus down into just a small or a piece of the setup. And this is where it starts to shift, because what I'm talking about is the composition, right? The composition is what's going to be included on that canvas, what's going to be fit onto that canvas. And again, this is more about, I'm talking specifically about representational or somewhat representational painting. It's not abstract, which is a different mode. But it is part of the reason I like working representationally, is because instead of coming from my own mind or my interior, let's say, self-generated process of what I'm seeing, it's can I remove my preconceived notions about what I'm seeing? And that starts to happen when I'm framing the thing. So I'm looking, and what's happening is I'm looking at not the flower itself. I'm looking at things like how sharp is the edge? And if we look at anything, you can start to see that what we think is the object, it is there, but that's a concept, because when I start to look at things like the edges, where does the shadow side of an object blend into the shadow that's cast by the object? So, and this we can do in nature too. It's like, okay, here's a flower and it's got a cast shadow. So there's a dark side, that's the shadow side. But then there's the shadow cast by the flower. And where that flower meets the shadow that it's cast, oftentimes there's no longer an edge, or an edge that can't be perceived, or it might be a very soft edge, right? So it could be a lost edge. So I'm not able to see, I'm no longer able to see. So shadow merges into shadow. And then it's looking at, let's say, an opposing edge or a different edge where the light is really striking the edge of that object and it's really bright, but the background might be really dark. And so that creates a very different edge than what's in the shadow side. So if you can hear what's happening is, instead of looking at the object, I'm looking at these aspects of the visual setting from different frames of lights and darks, soft and hard edges, lost edges. And then there's also color. So is it yellow? Is it blue? Is it green? What are the nuances in that yellow? So for example, and again, if you get to this in this one, where the yellow calla lily actually goes from almost a white to a green. So it's really starting to notice these things. And it's not Betty Edwards, which I've talked about, drawing in the right side of the brain, she talks about this process of just focused listening, let go, again, rest in awareness. It's almost like that thing, the same thing, resting in awareness, let my agenda go. I'm looking at a flower. No, I'm not looking at a flower. I'm looking at shapes and edges and colors and where does it change and where are those little areas that move from one variation of color to another. And then what happens is, as Betty Edwards described it, physiologically, it's our right brain starts to become the focus of our attention or the focus of our experience. She describes it as moving into the R mode or gestalt. And that actually is a real deal. It really happens. Mm-hmm. And then that's like, and that's when I start to paint.
Oh, so all of that is happening prior to the
completely
painting,
prior.
to the
completely all that. Yeah, go ahead.
In your definition, what would you say the right brain is in charge of? What does that mean to you?
Well, that word gestalt, which is, what Betty Edwards uses, is what it strikes me as. It is, instead of thinking that I have to, I got to get rid of that thought, I got to stop that thought, it's being able to shift to a different activity within the brain where, that's just there. So that I don't need to be even thinking about my agenda because that's gone, right? I'm now in this other mind state that we have the capacity as human beings, again, to experience. And there's something about that of, because the agenda tends to have a little bit of tension, a little bit of angst almost built into it. Like I gotta go somewhere, I gotta do something, blah, 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 blah. Versus right? The moment, the sunset, right? The beauty of the sunrise, the way the bird floats through the sky, right? Those moments of where it's a connection to a way we can perceive the world, which tends to be much more kind, much more gentle, much more joyful.
What if you take us through just 3 to 5 minutes of perception, of practicing perceiving what's around us?
It's funny you asked that question. I don't know if this is going to answer the question, but just as you were phrasing that question, I was starting to look at your face on the screen. And I could tell you about a practice for me and maybe this might be useful to people, because I use this all the time. When I'm with someone, listening to them, I listen, but I'm also paying attention to the visual scene of that person's face. And those things that I just mentioned about composing a painting, I bring those same things into mind. So for example, if I'm looking at your face, it's not about seeing, there's rain, and it's like a blur. It's like, I don't see anything. Let me notice from my perspective, what's the left side of your face, which for me is your right side, which for me is the right, but it's your left side, where the side of your face meets the hair that is adjacent to it. Mm-hmm. And right there, there's a very sharp edge. Mm-hmm. Your face is lit from that side. So I can go on about this if that's in some way answering your question. Is it?
Yes. I think that it's fascinating because I'm witnessing you taking us through your visual, through what you see. And you are a wonderfully talented artist, having painted, I don't know how many, I would say, thousands of amazing, brilliant paintings from scenes all over the world, nature, portraits. You are the best of the best. So yes, take us through what you see.
Okay, so I will continue then. But what I want to just say too, is I'm talking about this, for me, this is a way that I can actually pay more attention to the words that the person is speaking, because I'm letting go in that process. When I'm entering into the visual, I'm letting go of my own agenda of what I'm going to say next. So that's what it is. It's like creating spaciousness so I can hear the person, and I do that in this visual way. So going back to the edge of your face, but then it's noticing how the shape of that edge of your face is adjacent to the darkness of your hair. And then it's noticing also other aspects of, the way the light is casting a shadow across your face. So going from the bridge of your nose, for example, and these are words to describe what I'm seeing, but from the bridge of your nose along what I see is your left side, which is your, I don't know, whatever it is, but
Mhm.
it's the shadow side of your nose and how that's forming a shadow and what's the shape of that shadow. And then even within that shadow, what are the darker values of that shadow? So there's these different aspects, and then there's the overall of like, okay, around the nose, the nostril area, then typically we have darks that are here, and then there's the eye sockets, and then there's also going around to other parts of the face. So if I move to the other side of the face, then it's an exact example of where the hair is touching, say, around your neck or is adjacent to your neck. The difference between the shadow on your neck and the darkness of your hair, there's no longer any edge. So again, it's moving away from what I might not even perceive at all, right? It's like the blur. Oh, I'm wrapped up in the words you're thinking, but I'm wrapped up in my responses and how that affect me. Like, whatever. Now, if I can just create spaciousness to become aware of what I'm seeing, now those things tend to go away. And for me, anyway, it opens up so I can actually hear you better.
And would you say this is anything related to an eyes open meditation practice?
Ah, yeah. This is a good thing because this is good. So because another aspect of, let's say, that process that I just described of becoming aware of what I'm seeing, what happens for me oftentimes is the range of area that I'm seeing tends to open up. So I might be seeing your face, but all of a sudden I'm seeing, and there's this on the right and left. So it's seeing a larger scope of the entire scene that's within my range of vision, which is also part of it. It's being present to what is.
I get this. I have practiced this too. And I also have that experience of the visual field. In my words, there's even a dissolving that can happen where the visual field is still there, but also the awareness is there. It's the subtle realms become present for me, more present. They're always present, but am I focusing on them? And when that softness happens and the visual field opens up to the fabric of reality, there's so
Mm,
much more to see, but in a different way, almost like in a different light. But it's just what's there. It's just a focus shift.
mm. Yes. And something comes to mind going back to the first, let's say, teacher that I studied with, Gurdjieff. He would talk about, we're all asleep. That was one of his key phrases, we're asleep. And I think this is really true. There's a whole story on it, but just to say, for me, it is when I'm not aware, I'm asleep. It's just
Mhm.
as simple as that. And
Yeah.
so I'm not seeing, right? I'm asleep. I'm asleep at the wheel. I'm drifting through, life, and now if I can introduce something where it's the awareness has increased, and I'm aware, I think is, if I heard what you said correctly, I'm aware that I'm seeing. I'm aware of it rather than it's just, yep.
Rather than a happening, an awareness of seeing, and also an awareness of awareness.
Yes. Yep. And that this incarnation, this body, this person, this whatever it is actually experiencing it. This is another fascinating thing for me of like, so going into that state, it's like of awareness, it's, oh, how unique is this that this body is seeing this? Because it's not any other body. It's not on some other planet somewhere. It's this locus of, right, that whole witnessing.
Yeah. You get to be here witnessing this, as am I here witnessing this. And here
Yeah,
we
yeah,
are
yeah.
witnessing together.
Right. And going back to, let's say, the walking outside, that's another aspect of this. Like, oh, walking outside is like, so this thing that's walking is seeing all this. It's really kind of crazy.
Yes, yes. And I'm reminded of what was it that you mentioned? Sky meditation? Is that
Hmm.
the phrase? Can you teach us what sky meditation is?
I can tell, well, I mean, it's kind of, you can see out my window. It's like, oh, the sky. Anyway,
You'll have to send a picture, Seamus.
it's okay. This could be anywhere. Anywhere you can see anything or sky. I was talking with some artists friends came over last night. We were talking about the experience of. I did a series of looking up actually when I was in Berkeley, and it was about looking up. So we're in an urban area, and the tendency is, okay, we're looking horizontally, right? And so we're seeing cars and streets and lampposts and stop signs and traffic lights and buildings and whatever. All these human endeavors, right, that result in these things, which is all great and fine, but we get disconnected from something else. And so that whole thing of, let's say, sky meditation can be even in an urban area. It's like, okay, just look up at the sky. And then it might be, well, look at how the buildings frame the sky or whatever it is. But it's the same thing that I described about doing, let's say, a still life painting. It's, can I let everything go to the point of just looking, just looking, let the thoughts go, sky, sometimes clouds, watching the motion of the clouds. I'm going to guess almost everyone has experienced that. The
I
deep
hope so.
sensation, right? Of,
Yeah.
oh, look at the clouds. They're like kind of amazing. And they're constantly shifting, right? So there's this
Mhm.
whole play going on.
And just to include everyone, because perhaps somebody hasn't really taken a moment to look at the clouds, and that's okay too. So the challenge is everyone listening, look at the sky, notice the clouds. Is there any movement?
Mm,
Practice being aware in your way, in your town, in your yard, on your street, wherever you are. Look up.
mm, Look up. Yeah. And as I've mentioned, the biggest piece of that, I think, is I'm not going to try to figure it out. I'm just going to simply look and let what it is that I'm seeing enter into my awareness.
Let's see if we can interweave this statement that I heard you say recently. Nature speaks in silence.
This is exactly, that's the exact phrase. It's, nature is speaking all the time without words. And when we can get with that seeing and let go of the words, it really does speak to us in a very, I would almost call it a very profound way.
I agree.
It's harmonizing. Maybe that's what I call it. We become harmonized with nature. We're no longer us and that. We are that. Nature is us. We are nature.
So important to remember. Nature is us. We are nature. This erases the separation completely. We are. Nature is. We are together. We are one in that beingness.
Mm,
In the beingness, we all are.
yes, I think that almost summarizes the whole thing, the beingness, because the left brain, the thinking brain, is about the doing and having, and what we're talking about here is resting in the beingness. And our training in this culture is to be on the other side of doing and having And there's almost this aversion, like, you mean I could just be sitting looking? It's almost like something wrong with that. Versus what you're describing, the beingness, is like, yeah, how about honoring that as a mode, a way to live?
How about it? I love that you practice entering in this being that we already are through the visual field, and entering in, meaning we're already here, you're already here, but that conscious shift into what am I seeing? Allowing the visual field to be received, receiving the sky into consciously being.
Mm.
What more would you like people to know about you or your artwork or your practice or anything from what we've spoken about? What more would you like to share today?
I think I'm almost complete for today, but the one thing, maybe the one remaining thing is, and why I like Betty Edwards so much, because that whole book, Drawing the Right Submission, she's leading people through exercises. And that might be useful for people if they want to really follow up on this R mode that she describes in there, because the way she does it is it's brilliant. It's just brilliant. Very simple exercises. And she starts the whole thing off like, everybody says they can't draw, and they actually sometimes even have traumatic experiences from childhood of where they were shamed or ridiculed or whatever. And honestly, I really have, I've taught quite a bit. And I remember several people, when they were touched with what their childhood experience was around drawing, it was almost trauma. So it's good to be aware of that, but it also might be a nice place for people to revisit. Betty Edwards walks through these steps, but the practice then, I guess what I would say, it's a very practical, it's almost like, here's how you meditate. So her thing of here's how you draw is a way then to have very concrete steps of how to enter into this state of awareness or process of awareness that we've been talking about today.
What a great resource. And you're a great resource too. You mentioned that you teach, and I've mentioned your artwork. We've been talking about your artwork. What do you want people to know about how they might find you if that's of a desire for you? Do you want people to find you?
Well, they came knocking my door and I didn't answer it. I like my solitude. But anyway, so two things. Yes, my website is, it's got artwork. And the truth is, look, not everybody's going to take the time to paint. So, something like a painting like this, if it speaks to people, they're there, they're available. And there's prints, like you mentioned about Nature Speaks in Silence, Rest and Awareness. There are prints that, if your practice is not to draw or paint or whatever, then they might be useful to you as just reminders, like an icon. Put it on your wall, your altar in your house of, oh, let me remember to just look, let go of things, let go, let's just be for a while. We've also started, Robin, as you know, Robin and I started a while ago another site called Artful Awareness, where we're more talking about these things on a regular basis, and we've got things on Instagram Live and things like that. So,
and describe who Robin is to you, so people know.
So Robin is another person in the Bay Area. Met sometime shortly after you and I met, probably. And Robin she and I worked together for, I don't know, whatever number of years, 15 years. And she's been to my workshops. She's helped with, my things. So she's been an assistant for many years. And her main interest is, of course, talking about awareness and consciousness. So that's the real connection. And that's why she came up with this phrase of, artful awareness. So it's putting words to this thing of how do we, what's the usefulness of art, of creating art, or whatever. And then this is it. It's also the idea that awareness, or the entering into awareness, or the practice of awareness, can be fun and playful, right? Artful, playful, right? It's not so, I gotta like sit and meditate. Oh, this is hard, like all that kind of stuff. Versus spaciousness. Hey, this is fun. Let me go look at some birds today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me just go watch the birds or the clouds. Oh, I'm just going to do nothing. Watch the clouds. Look at those clouds, right? So there's going to be play there. So artful awareness. And anyway, getting back to Robin, I think that's part of our connection of having this idea of, can a practice of paying attention, or practice of increasing our awareness or becoming more aware, be playful too? And art is a means to do that.
Wonderful. You two make such a great team. And I just love talking with you, Seamus. And I love you. I'm so glad that we are connected through all these years and different iterations of our lives. I mean, I guess particularly me, I was not a mom
Yeah,
when we met, for example. So I'm so glad we stayed connected.
indeed. Indeed.
Thank you so much for listening. Please join me for a free online meditation event that begins tomorrow. Simply email me meditation@rainelizabeth.org and I'll send you the simple sign up. It will be a delightful 3-day, 1-hour event. If you cannot make any of the lives or you miss part of a day, you can receive the replay. So you will not miss out. Just sign up, come if you can, enjoy the replays. They're there for you to keep. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, March 28th, 29th, and 30th. 10 a.m. Eastern. It is all about the healing power of meditation. We will go through breath work. We will go through releasing the past. We will go through growing abundance, and we will rest in the present moment, just as it is, learning more and more about how to embody presence right here and right now. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you soon. Thank you so much for listening. It has been a great joy to have your presence here in this podcast. I welcome you to celebrate the joy and wisdom in your life exactly as it is. And I welcome you to feel loved, fully loved, exactly as you are. www.rainelizabeth.org